The year is 2025. The Eagles were coming off one of the most dominant Super Bowl wins the league had ever seen. Their 40-22 blowout of the Chiefs in Super Bowl 59 was a showcase of their perfectly constructed roster. In the aftermath, a critical light shined on Kansas City. After a second straight subpar offensive season, analysts questioned the Chiefs' lack of explosiveness and dynamic weapons. Patrick Mahomes heard the criticism loud and clear, as did Andy Reid, and the loss planted a massive chip on their shoulders. But Mahomes' greatest rivals, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson, had their own points to prove after years of gutting exits. And the Patriots turned to a familiar face by hiring Mike Vrabel as their next head coach. A three-time Super Bowl champion as a player, Vrabel returned to Foxborough after a successful 6-year run with the Tennessee Titans. Known for toughness, situational mastery, and accountability, traits forged under Bill Belichick, Vrabel's arrival was a philosophical reset after a disastrous 2024. Fast forward to the NFL draft, Cam Ward went first overall to the Titans, but Jacksonville made the boldest move by trading up to number 2 to select Travis Hunter, a two-way Heisman superstar they believed could reshape the franchise and possibly the sport. The Jags showed conviction by sending a massive package to the Cleveland Browns that included a 2026 first. New head coach Liam Coen and new GM James Gladstone viewed Hunter as a player worthy of a first-round grade at receiver and corner. So the plan? Start him on offense, expand his defensive role, and build an identity around a true modern Iron Man. But the story of the draft was not who went first or second, it was who kept falling. For months, it was predicted that Shedeur Sanders would land in New York. The Giants did extensive homework on the Colorado QB and even traded back into the first round, igniting brief certainty that Shedeur was their quarterback of the future. Instead, they stunned the room by selecting Ole Miss QB Jackson Dart, sending Sanders into a freefall. Round after round, he was passed up until the Browns traded up into the 5th to grab him at a steep discount. A prospect once discussed at the top of the draft wasn't even the highest QB drafted by his own team, sparking theories of bad interviews and even conspiracy to keep him out of the league entirely. But Seattle got their franchise guy by signing Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100 million deal, a move rooted in belief that his 4,300-yard, 35-touchdown breakout season in Minnesota was for real. So with Darnold gone, the Vikings turned the page to J.J. McCarthy. After missing his entire rookie season with the torn meniscus, McCarthy stepped into an environment under head coach Kevin O'Connell so quarterback-friendly, it was nearly impossible to fail. Washington entered the season coming off their best year since 1991. 2024's number 2 overall pick Jaden Daniels rekindled the franchise, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year, leading a turnaround that included a Hail Mary moment and making an NFC Championship appearance. The Commanders extended Terry McLaurin and traded for Deebo Samuel, enhancing Daniels' dual-threat prowess. But while Daniels took home the hardware, his rookie classmate Bo Nix and the Broncos were generating even more buzz. Ahead of schedule under Sean Payton, Nix won 10 games as a rookie and ended Denver's playoff drought. Confident about his QB, Payton spoke openly about Super Bowl aspirations, backed by a loaded defense and veteran additions. But Chicago landed the crown jewel of the 2025 coaching cycle in Ben Johnson, the offensive architect behind Detroit's league-leading attack. After grabbing Colston Loveland and Luther Burden with his first 2 draft picks, he looked like the franchise-altering hire that would finally revolutionize a Bears offense that had lagged for decades, unlock Caleb Williams, and beat Matt LaFleur twice a year. But as training camp opened, Williams struggled adjusting to Johnson's system. Reports of growing pains, interceptions, and questions about maturity occupied the headlines. Chicago's rebuild, even with the right hire, would demand patience. Caleb wasn't the only one learning that physical talent alone does not put you on the fast track, though. After a competitive camp, Indianapolis named Daniel Jones the Week 1 starter, beating out former 4th overall pick Anthony Richardson. Jones, signed to a 1-year prove-it deal, offered things Richardson did not: availability, steadiness, and command of the offense. But you know who's been pretty reliable for 2 decades? Aaron Rodgers, who signed a 1-year deal late in the offseason with the Steelers. At 41, Rodgers framed the decision as a situation that felt right, built around trust in Mike Tomlin and an iconic franchise. A franchise that, just 1 month earlier, traded away its most volatile star. Pittsburgh sent George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys. cashing out on the uber-talented but loose cannon receiver. Pickens could dominate corners one snap and completely sabotage himself the next, a pattern that eventually wore out his welcome. Now paired with CeeDee Lamb, the Cowboys gambled that a change of scenery and a contract year could bring out the best in Pickens. The writing was on the wall for George Pickens the moment the Steelers traded for DK Metcalf in March and handed him a $150 million extension to be the offense's primary explosive threat. But just as fans were dreaming on a lethal Cowboys offense, Jerry Jones nuked all preseason excitement by trading away their best defensive player of the generation. After a prolonged contract dispute, Micah, aka Michael Parsons, was sent to the Green Bay Packers for 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark. Losing him made everything else feel secondary. And in the Sin City, the Raiders hired Pete Carroll and I think the rest of his family to rebuild their culture. His first major moves were to reunite with Geno Smith, then add historically productive Boise State back Ashton Jeanty with the 6th overall pick. Alright, quick real-life story. Every single month, there's at least one day where it seems like everything hits all at once for me. Have to fill up my gas tank, get groceries, and then some other random expense pops up that I did not expect. All of a sudden, a day where I have to spend $600 can become very stressful. And that's exactly where something like Clover would be very clutch. It's really about having breathing room so one single day doesn't wreck your entire week. Clover is an earned wage access app that allows you to access up to $400 before payday without a credit check, late fees, or interest. You can wait a few days for the transfer or pay a small fee if you want it right away. And there's no monthly membership required just to get in advance. It's built to be transparent and help you avoid the sketchy, high-fee stuff that's out there. It's perfect for covering things that you just need for everyday living or simply when life happens at the wrong time. So if you do happen to find yourself short on cash, access up to $400 with no late fees or credit check. Click the link below or scan the QR code so they know I sent you. The Chargers wasted no time, opening the season with a win on the global stage as Justin Herbert outdueled Patrick Mahomes in Sao Paulo, throwing for 318 yards and 3 scores to snap a 7-game skid against KC. And after a decisive Week 2 win over Vegas, LA rallied late against Denver with a clutch Keenan Allen touchdown before Cameron Dicker's walk-off kick inked the 3-0 start. But in Week 4, they ran into a Giants team desperate for a spark. After opening 0-3, New York made the switch to Jackson Dart for his first career start just 2 weeks removed from Russell Wilson torching Dallas for 450 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Dart brought instant energy, scoring once through the air and on the ground, as the Giants handed LA their first loss to earn their first win, though it came at the cost of Malik Neighbors, who tore his ACL in the second quarter. Still, Dart's debut ignited optimism for the future, unlike J.J. McCarthy, whose nightmarish debut in Chicago turned into a signature moment when he threw 2 touchdowns and ran for another to steal a Week 1 win over the Bears. But in Week 2, Atlanta tormented McCarthy with 6 sacks and 3 turnovers. Shortly after, Minnesota announced that a high ankle sprain would be sending him to injured reserve. Officially, it was an injury. Unofficially, some theorized it was a soft benching. Carson Wentz took over for a 48-10 blowout of the Bengals, and the Vikings were 2-2. As were the Bears, who began 0-2, got punched first by Minnesota, and then absolutely flattened 52-21 by the Lions in Ben Johnson's return to Detroit, making his new tenure feel shaky fast. But in Week 3, Caleb Williams played arguably the best game of his young career, throwing 4 touchdowns and slicing up Dallas for Ben Johnson's first win as head coach. A week later in Vegas wasn't pretty. Williams dealt with constant pressure from Max Crosby, and the run game vanished. But a late touchdown drive and a blocked field goal was enough for the 25-24 win. Thus, the Cardiac Bears were born, a mere warm-up for the madness they would ultimately create in 2025. But Caleb wasn't the only one having success in a new scheme. Daniel Jones was reborn under Shane Steichen, making a squeaky clean Colts debut in a 33-8 win over Miami, before a Week 2 comeback against Denver that ended with Spencer Schrader missing from 60, only to get a second chance after a penalty to drill the winner from 45. By Week 3 in Tennessee, Indy was rolling. A Kenny Moore pick 6 on the 3rd play of the game set the tone, and Jonathan Taylor piled on 3 touchdowns. But while Indy was busy with their 3-0 start, Matthew Stafford and the Rams were on their own surge. Now with Devontae Adams giving Sean McVay a new hammer to swing, Stafford looked totally unbothered by his preseason back scare. and the Rams started 2-0. Even their first loss in Philadelphia was a game they nearly won before it ended on a blocked kick returned for a touchdown. And in Week 4 hosting the Colts, Stafford to Nacua tied it late. Then an 88-yard Tutu Atwell touchdown gave the Colts their first loss. And after 1 month, Puka Nacua was on pace for over 2,100 yards and 179 receptions. Aaron Rodgers kicked off his Steelers career with 4 touchdowns and a game-winning drive in his revenge game at the Jets, emerging triumphant from a shootout with Justin Fields. Week 3 in Foxborough, the Steelers' defense forced 5 turnovers, and a late touchdown to Calvin Austin clinched a road victory. Then in front of 75,000 strong in Dublin, an 80-yard Metcalf catch and run, 2 Gainwell touchdowns, and 6 sacks of Carson Wentz made Pittsburgh 3-1 heading into their bye. And the timing couldn't have been better, because AFC North QBs were dropping like flies. Cincinnati's season tilted in Week 2 when Joe Burrow went down with a presumably season-ending turf toe injury, and the Bengals were outscored 76-13 in their next 2 with Jake Browning under center. Meanwhile, the Ravens went from scoring 40 in a classic Sunday night loss to Buffalo to sitting at 1-3. But even worse, Lamar Jackson pulled up with a significant hamstring injury in Kansas City as the Chiefs poured it on in Week 4. And at the end of September, just 2 undefeated teams remained. The Bills' 4-0 start, highlighted by their incredible Week 1 comeback against the Ravens where they overcame a 15-point fourth-quarter deficit, and the Eagles having taken down the likes of the Cowboys, Chiefs, Rams, and Bucs for their own perfect start. But neither one of those teams looked as thrilled as Tyreek Hill did. Just minutes after a season-ending knee injury, Cheetah was all smiles, waving and blowing kisses to the crowd in one of the strangest visuals of the season. All 3 of the Buccaneers' September wins had come by 3 points or fewer in the final minute. In Week 5 at Seattle, they added another. Levante David's last-minute interception set up a walk-off kick that made them the first team ever with 4 such wins in 5 games. Baker Mayfield was firmly in the MVP conversation, while Emeka Egbuka was off to one of the best rookie receiver starts ever with Mike Evans sidelined. The Bucs were 6-2 after wins over the Saints and 49ers, who, despite that loss, were gritting out wins unlike anyone in the league. Brock Purdy was out indefinitely with turf toe, George Kittle on IR with a hamstring, and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner gone for the year. Yet Mac Jones kept Shanahan's offense humming. On Thursday night of Week 5 in LA, missing his entire starting receiving core, Jones threw for 342 yards and 2 scores, while Kendrick Bourne's 10 catches for 142 yards also helped propel the Niners to a 26-23 OT win over the Rams. By the end of October, they sat 5-3, propped up by Jones, McCaffrey, and elite coaching. But their rival Seahawks were 6-2. Sam Darnold was throwing the ball about as well as anyone in the NFL, but Jaxon Smith-Njigba was breaking the sport. Through 8 games, he was on pace for over 2,000 yards, making his case as the best receiver in football. Their biggest statement came on Sunday night in Week 9. Darnold opened 17 for 17 and threw 4 touchdowns before his first incompletion, carving up Washington 38-14. But the game turned somber when Jaden Daniels' elbow did its best impression of Tyreek Hill's knee. Just weeks after returning from his own knee sprain, the 3-6 Commanders' franchise QB was back in medical limbo after being left in a game that was already over. But during this same time, Drake May was verging on elite, and the Patriots won every October game in the midst of what would balloon to a 10-game win streak. They headed to Buffalo in Week 5 on Sunday night to prove themselves as serious threats in the AFC East, and May was nearly perfect when it mattered most, escaping pressure on the game-winning drive and feeding Stephon Diggs, who torched his former team for 146 yards to set up the deciding kick. The 23-20 win legitimized the Pats and launched an AFC East race. At the end of the month, even Myles Garrett's 5 sacks couldn't derail them. May threw 3 second-half touchdown passes to erase an early deficit and pull away 32-13. It took a half-decade, but once again, the Pats were great under center and on the sideline. But the Jags were getting that same new coach bump, and their official arrival came in prime time versus Kansas City, when Trevor Lawrence turned a stumble into a go-ahead scramble to beat the Chiefs 31-28. Travis Hunter flashed earlier in the night, climbing the ladder for a ridiculous 44-yard grab, but the real Hunter explosion came Week 7 in London. Yes, the Jaguars got run over 35-7 by the Rams, but Hunter racked up 8 catches for 101 yards and his first touchdown. He led the team in targets, catches, and yards. And during their Week 8 bye, reports out of Jacksonville were that he was about to be fully unleashed as their wide receiver 1 and cornerback 1. But out of nowhere, Hunter was placed on injured reserve with a season-ending non-contact knee injury suffered in practice, ending the most fascinating development in the league. The two-way unicorn, future focal point of the offense, and the guy they were building the entire second half of the season around, gone before he was able to truly take off. It was a rough month for injuries around the NFL. Not only Daniels and Hunter, but also Kyler Murray, Cam Scadaboo's ankle fracture ending what was going to be a monster rookie season, as well as Tucker Kraft. Just 1 week after destroying the Steelers to the tune of 143 yards and 2 touchdowns on Sunday night, the ginormous season he was about to have was cut short by a torn ACL in their Week 9 loss versus Carolina, who had their own injuries to deal with. But fortunately for them, once Chuba Hubbard strained his calf, Rico Dowdle stepped up and ran all over the Dolphins and Cowboys for 206 and 183 yards respectively, keeping the Panthers afloat at 4-4. But despite the Packers' surprising Week 9 loss to them, Green Bay was still atop the NFC North, a half game ahead of the Lions. In the AFC North, though, a big trade was made when the Bengals, desperate for anyone other than Jake Browning to revive their dying offense, acquired Joe Flacco from the Browns. And Flacco began his Cincinnati tenure absolutely on fire, waking Jamar Chase and T. Higgins from the dead, beating Aaron Rodgers in the Week 7 Unk Bowl, and throwing for 470 yards and 4 touchdowns in a Week 9 loss to Chicago, where Caleb Williams hit Colston Loveland for a 58-yard game-winning touchdown with under 30 seconds left, proving to everyone who prematurely mocked them for drafting Loveland over Penn State's Tyler Warren that they made the right choice. Through half a season, the Colts offense was pacing toward historic territory. The peak of their run came Week 10 in Berlin, when Jonathan Taylor ran for 244 yards and 3 touchdowns, including an 83-yard house call and the walk-off score in OT to beat Atlanta 31-25. But their November did not end cleanly. Daniel Jones suffered a fractured fibula that he was determined to play through, and with a challenging December looming, they fell to 8-4 after 2 losses, one of which was to the Chiefs, who, despite getting Rashee Rice back from suspension in October, were trending downward at 6-6, dropping one-score games to Buffalo and Denver, before also taking a Thanksgiving loss to a rising Cowboys team. Dallas was benefiting not only from trade deadline acquisition Quinnen Williams, but from George Pickens' stratospheric ascent. Having already dominated after CeeDee Lamb's high ankle sprain back in Week 3, in November, Pickens racked up 144 yards at Vegas and 146 versus the Eagles prior to their Week 12 win over KC. Winners of 3 straight, Dallas was 6-5-1. However, the Broncos were on what would become an 11-game win streak. They went 4-0 in November, but won every game by 3 points or less. They were a somewhat unintimidating 10-2. But the Texans' defense was becoming scary. After falling to 3-5 following a Week 9 loss to Denver, they outscored Jacksonville 26-0 in the fourth quarter of Week 10 before beating Tennessee and completely shutting down Josh Allen. Houston went 3-0 in CJ Stroud's absence before he returned Week 13 to notch another win over the Colts. But with the deadline addition of Jalen Phillips, the Eagles' defense was no slouch either. They held opponents to just 16 points per game in November, but could only manage a 2-2 record because of their bizarrely dysfunctional offense. The Bears pulled out 3 more one-score wins. In Week 10, Caleb threw and ran for touchdowns in the final 4 minutes to come back against the Giants before a walk-off field goal at Minnesota Week 11. 2 weeks later, they traveled to Philly, picked up a 24-15 win, and the once 0-2 Bears were now 9-3 atop the NFC North. But at the bottom of the NFC North sat the Vikings. After McCarthy's return and win at Detroit, the existence of his alter ego 9 entered the mainstream. But after immediately following that with 3 straight losses and another injury, 9 became one of 2025's great memes. Shifting to the AFC North, Lamar Jackson made his long-awaited return and rattled off 4 wins. But Lamar was without his typical burst, which became especially evident on Thanksgiving, when Joe Burrow miraculously returned to the Bengals and drove their offense to 32 points, while Baltimore could only put 14 on the board against one of the league's worst defenses. Still, Cincy was 4-8, while the Ravens were in first place at 6-6. But Cleveland was not without appeal either. Not only was Myles Garrett on a torrid pace, racking up 13 sacks in a 4-game span, but at long last, Shedeur Sanders replaced Dillon Gabriel and won his first start Week 12 in Vegas. After drawing real Super Bowl buzz, Tampa Bay fell off a cliff from November on. The 34-7 embarrassment against the Rams in Week 2 and a blown 14-point fourth-quarter lead to Atlanta in Week 15 were low points of a 1-7 stretch. With Baker Mayfield likely playing hurt and Igbuka hitting a rookie wall, Carolina clinched the NFC South after Atlanta beat New Orleans in Week 18. Neither of which had playoff-worthy seasons, but Bijan Robinson led the NFL in scrimmage yards, while Tyler Shuck impressed mightily after replacing Spencer Rattler in New Orleans. However, Tetairoa McMillan was Offensive Rookie of the Year. The NFC West was basically a triple threat match down the stretch, but the Seahawks won the division and the NFC's top seed by beating San Francisco Week 18. Sam Darnold's sustained excellence, JSN's Offensive Player of the Year campaign, and the league's #1 scoring defense made Seattle the NFL's most complete team. But San Francisco nearly stealing the 1 seed despite a hospital ward's worth of injuries was just as impressive. Brock Purdy was back, CMC caught 102 passes, and the 49ers finished 12-5. The Rams, meanwhile, went 3-3 over their final 6. And in arguably the game of the year, Week 16 at Seattle, the Seahawks erased a 16-point fourth-quarter deficit before winning 38-37 on the NFL's first ever game-winning 2-point conversion in overtime. But with 46 touchdowns, Matthew Stafford won his first MVP. And while the Cardinals weren't any good, Trey McBride set the single-season reception record for a tight end with 126. The same goes for the 5-12 Browns, who were blessed with new stars in tight end Harold Fannin and Rookie of the Year linebacker Carson Schlesinger, and a new record when Myles Garrett recorded his 23rd sack en route to Defensive Player of the Year. The AFC North, though, came down to the final game of the season. Aaron Rodgers threw a 26-yard touchdown to Calvin Austin with 55 seconds left to take a 26-24 lead over the Ravens. However, Lamar put them in position to win before Tyler Loop's 44-yard kick sailed wide as time expired. Days later, owner Steve Bisciotti made the emotional decision to fire John Harbaugh, closing an 18-year chapter that included a Super Bowl, but ended with one of the most disappointing seasons for any team in 2025. The AFC South was tight as well. The Texans and their defense won their final 9 games, but Jacksonville won their final 8, clinching the division as Trevor Lawrence made an MVP-caliber run in December. With the help of Parker Washington and deadline acquisition Jacoby Myers, he accounted for 22 touchdowns over his final 7 games, including 5 passing and 1 rushing in Week 15 against the Jets. While Daniel Jones, one of the MVPs of the first half, tore his Achilles in a Week 14 loss versus the Jags, effectively ending the Colts season aside from a small stretch made entertaining by the return of Grandpa Phillip Rivers. The Patriots became the AFC East champs for the first time since 2019 thanks to a 42-10 Week 17 blowout of the Jets, paired with Buffalo's 13-12 loss to Philly. Vrabel pulled off a worst-to-first transformation that felt eerily familiar in Foxborough, and Drake May was the MVP runner-up. Likewise, Chicago established a new era. Down 10 late, rival in town, division on the line, Caleb Williams did what franchise QBs do. Chicago trailed Green Bay 16-6 with under 2 minutes left. Cairo Santos made it 16-9 before a recovered onside kick and a TD pass to Ja'Day Walker sent it to OT, where Caleb dropped a perfect 46-yard pass into DJ Moore's hands for the game winner, which was the Bears' 6th win after trailing in the final 2 minutes. Chicago won the NFC North. Green Bay finished second but lost Micah Parsons to a torn ACL, while Minnesota finished ahead of Detroit at 9-8, despite enduring the worst QB play in the entire NFL. Even more surprisingly, the Chiefs missed the playoffs for the first time since 2014 at 6-11. Their disaster of a season was exacerbated by Mahomes' Week 15 torn ACL. Above them in the AFC West were the Chargers at 11-6 with an injury-ravaged O-line, and the Broncos, who clinched the AFC's #1 seed at 14-3. And finally, the Eagles' talent won the NFC East by default. The Cowboys' November renaissance turned out to be nothing more than a flash in the pan, with losses in 4 of their final 5, including Week 18 to the Giants, who had a tumultuous year losing Neighbors, Scattaboo, and firing Brian Daboll. But Jackson Dart gave all the reason in the world to be encouraged about his future, more than holding his own with almost no weapons to speak of. The Rams and Panthers met again after Carolina's surprising Week 13 upset. In an equally chaotic rematch, Stafford and Nakua traded blows with Bryce Young throughout the second half. A blocked punt helped give Carolina a late edge, but Stafford answered with a final minute drive, finding Colby Parkinson for the winning score to escape 34-31. Next, the rubber match between the Bears and Packers. Green Bay stormed out to a 21-3 halftime lead behind 3 Jordan Love touchdown passes and a defense that stymied Chicago with turnovers and fourth down stops. But in the second half, the Bears defense slammed the door. Caleb Williams caught fire, and a furious comeback followed. After the third McManus miss of the game, Williams delivered the knockout blow once again with a 25-yard touchdown to DJ Moore. Chicago's D sealed their first playoff win since 2011 and reignited the once one-sided rivalry. But the long-awaited postseason meeting between the Bills and Jaguars was a back-and-forth battle. Momentum swung with field goals, a failed fourth down, and short yardage touchdowns that kept the game tight deep into the fourth quarter. Lawrence and Allen produced 4 lead changes in the closing minutes alone, but ultimately Buffalo converted multiple tush pushes and powered in the go-ahead score with just over a minute left. Then on Jacksonville's final possession, Lawrence's tip pass was intercepted, and the hottest team in the AFC was bounced in round 1. Sunday afternoon, early touchdowns and a George Kittle torn Achilles set the tone for 49ers-Eagles. This game also swung repeatedly in the fourth quarter, but Brock Purdy had the answers. And after his touchdown pass to McCaffrey, Philly turned it over on downs on the edge of the red zone, ending their feeble title defense. And in prime time, the Patriots silenced the Chargers. LA squandered 2 first-half goal line chances and managed only 3 points as Justin Herbert dealt with pressure on 30 of 31 dropbacks. New England slowly pulled away, turning a narrow halftime lead into a 16-3 win for their first playoff victory since Super Bowl 53. And on Monday night, after a turnover-laden first half, the Texans' defense took over, strip-sacking Aaron Rodgers for a scoop and score and later adding a pick six to break the game open. Despite Nico Collins' concussion, Houston cruised to a 30-6 road win. The loss marked Pittsburgh's 7th straight postseason defeat, and the following day, Mike Tomlin resigned after 19 seasons, closing one of the longest tenures in NFL history. After a slew of uncharacteristic Bills fumbles, Denver built a 20-10 halftime lead. And even after 2 second-half Allen touchdowns, Bo Nix hit Marvin Mims to take the lead with under a minute left before a Prater field goal sent the game to a very controversial overtime. A disputed interception ruling, and then 2 pass interference flags set up the Broncos' game-winning kick. The mile-high crowd erupted, but their elation was cut short when Sean Payton astonishingly announced immediately after the game that Nix's season was over due to a broken ankle on the second-to-last play of overtime. As for the Bills, GM Brandon Beane was promoted, while head coach Sean McDermott was fired after yet another devastating postseason exit. But the hottest story became which one of them pushed hardest to draft second-year bust and cookie-loving wide receiver Keon Coleman. Next, the Seahawks continued on from their dominant Week 18, seemingly ending the game on the first play with a Rashid Shaheed kickoff return touchdown before burying San Francisco. At half, the Seahawks led 24-6, and the rest of the game became a showcase for Kenneth Walker, who scored 3 rushing touchdowns after backfield mate Zach Charbonnet tore his ACL. Seattle won 41-6 and clinched their first NFC Championship berth since 2014, while 49ers brass were tasked with addressing the humongous electrical substation right next to their practice facility that had been Chernobyling and decimating their entire roster for years. The following day, the Patriots hosted the Texans for a punt party in Foxborough, but after a Pop Douglas touchdown, the game morphed into an interception invitational. CJ Stroud was worthy of being benched at halftime, threw 4 INTs, and looked unfit to be on an NFL field as the Patriots defense made a fool out of him, evidenced by a Marcus Jones pick six. Houston stayed alive with field goals, but May just about ended it with a 32-yard pass to Kayshon Boutte, who somehow hauled it in with one hand for a diving touchdown. The Pats won 28-16, while Stroud ended his postseason with 5 interceptions and 5 fumbles in 2 games. And last but certainly not least, Caleb Williams opened his snowy night versus the Rams with an INT, which Kyren Williams took advantage of, capping off an 85-yard scoring drive. Chicago answered with a gutsy 4th down touchdown before the game devolved into a defensive stalemate, broken when Kyren punched in his second rushing score midway through the 4th, but with 30 seconds left on 4th down and their season on the line, Caleb put all of his previous jaw-dropping plays to shame, hitting Cole Kmet for a 14-yard touchdown after running backwards for 20 yards and throwing it 46 yards in the air to force OT. But sadly, in OT, Caleb's third interception led to a Harrison Mevis walk-off field goal, eliminating one of the most entertaining teams of my lifetime. Thank you, the Bears. With Bo Nix sidelined, the Patriots flew to Denver as road favorites. But Jarrett Stidham jump-started the Broncos with a 52-yard strike to Marvin Mims that set up a Cortland Sutton touchdown. But 2 drives later, a failed 4th down rather than a field goal kept Denver's lead to 7. Late in the half, a chest pass to absolutely no one by Stidham was ruled a backward pass and recovered by New England, leading to a Drake May rushing score that tied it at 7. Snow and wind took over in the second half, so the Patriots managed only a field goal for a 10-7 lead. Missed kicks and a tipped Broncos field goal attempt kept it there before a late Christian Gonzalez interception and clutch May scramble iced New England's trip to Super Bowl 60. But the NFC Championship was a classic. After the Seahawks and Rams split 2 razor-thin regular season matchups, Seattle struck first on a Kenneth Walker goal line run, Matthew Stafford threw for 3 scores, while Darnold responded with 3 of his own. JSN shined with 10 catches for 153 yards and a first-half touchdown, while Puka Nacua went for 163. A pivotal swing came early in the third when Rams returner Xavier Smith muffed a punt, gifting Seattle a short field touchdown. Later, a Tariq Woolen taunting penalty kept a Rams drive alive, and on the very next play, Nacua burned the defense for a deep touchdown. Still, Seattle's defense held firm in the red zone late. Darnold then drained the clock, and LA ran out of time. After the Patriots won the toss, they deferred and the Seahawks took the ball first. Seattle moved it well early, highlighted by a 23-yard strike to Cooper Kupp, but stiff red zone defense forced a 33-yard Jason Myers field goal. New England's opening drive showed brief promise before Drake May was dropped for a 10-yard sack by Derek Hall, a sign of trouble to come. The first half became a field position battle. Kenneth Walker ripped off runs of 30 and 29 yards on one drive to set up another Myers kick, and Seattle added a third field goal in the final seconds before halftime. The Seahawks led 9-0, having controlled tempo while the Patriots' offense failed repeatedly against a relentless pass rush. And that pressure defined the second half. After a New England 3-and-out, Seattle drove 69 yards, mixing short passes with nice runs, and Myers drilled his 4th field goal to make it 12-0. Punts followed until Hall sacked May again, this time stripping him with Byron Murphy recovering. Early in the 4th, Sam Darnold converted 3rd and long to Kupp before tossing a 16-yard touchdown to A.J. Barner to tighten Seattle's grip at 19-0. New England finally answered with a lightning-quick 3-play drive, May hitting Mac Hollins for a 35-yard score, but any momentum vanished quickly. On their next possession, May was intercepted by Julian Love on a terrible deep shot, and Seattle turned that into Myers' Super Bowl record 5th field goal before Devon Witherspoon's blitz forced another May fumble that was returned 45 yards for a touchdown, tying a Super Bowl record with Seattle's 7th sack. The Ramondre Stevenson touchdown that followed was mostly just for pride. Their onside kick failed, and that was all she wrote. The Seahawks defense, swarming and opportunistic, earned widespread praise, as did Sam Darnold for completing his draft bust to Super Bowl champion redemption arc, while Kenneth Walker's 135 rushing yards secured Super Bowl MVP honors. Now let's relive what happened the last time the Seahawks played in the Super Bowl.